Good afternoon and welcome to the Groundwater Allocation meeting. Looks like we have about 53 participants and we were expecting right around that number. So I think we're probably ready to get going. We'll be together from 2 to 4 today. And again, this presentation is being put on by the Oregon Water Resources Department. I'm Jamie Damon, and I'll be facilitating our conversation today. I have a few introductory slides to walk through, just to let you know how we've organized our time together. You'll see in the chat that we have open Bianca, who has put some information in there about if you need any technical assistance, you can email or send a chat to her, and she'll do her best to help you out. And again, this meeting is being recorded. So welcome everyone. Let's go ahead and go to our next slide. So we have a few tips for our attendees. We've been in a Zoom environment now for quite a while, so these won't come as any surprise. I will ask that you please keep yourself muted when you're not speaking. We can mute you from our end as well. When it comes time for the question and answer period, we'll ask that you raise your hand using the raise your hand button or press *9 if you've just joined us by phone. If you're having any issues with raising your hand to get in the queue, you can put your question in the chat and we'll keep track of questions in the chat. We do ask that if at all possible, you raise your hand and ask your question verbally as opposed to using the chat, but we will keep the chat open for technical questions, technical issues, and if you're having trouble asking a question in the chat or raising your hand. When it comes time for the Q&A, use your webcam as much as you're comfortable. It's not required for you to have your camera on. Let's go ahead and go to the next slide. So our agenda today is pretty straightforward. We've got a few introductory comments to make. Folks will introduce themselves from Water Resources Department so you know who all is here. And then we have a presentation from 2:10 to 3:45. That timing isn't quite right. It should be 2:10 to 2:45. Yeah. Ivan, is that right?
That's correct. I think we wanted more than 5 minutes of a public.
We do want more than 5 minutes for our question and answer. So the presentation goes from 2:10 to 2:45, and then we'll be opening it up for clarifying questions and to share your ideas. We wanted to have the majority of the time in Q&A. And so again, the Q&A time will start at 2:45 and will go until 3:50. So we'll have over an hour to hear from all of you on the line today. And we'll take a few minutes before we close at 4 for next steps, just to wrap up so you know what's happening next. So again, for anybody that's just joining us and looking at the agenda, our Q&A time will start at 2:45 and we'll go for just over an hour. And if you can hold your questions until the end of Justin's presentation, that would be terrific. You can put questions in the chat or you can hold your questions until the Q&A time, and then we'll give you the guidelines for that when we get there. And we'll be done at 4. So a few meeting guidelines to honor the agenda, pretty straightforward agenda. We have a little bit of information to share, but the bulk of the time is your questions and comments from all of you. We ask that you participate actively and respectfully. There'll be differences of opinions, and so we expect that. We ask that you respect other people's opinions. We also ask that you be mindful of your speaking time. I'll be watching to see folks that have spoken more than once, and I'll lean on people who haven't had a chance to participate before I give people who have already spoken once a second chance. So we'll just be watchful for that. Stay on mute when you're not speaking. I already talked about that. Refrain from sidebar conversations. If you're all in the room together, that makes sense. People will be like, oh yeah, don't talk with your partners side by side. But in a virtual environment, that really means don't use the chat for sidebar conversations. We really want to have you engage with us during the Q&A time around questions, raising your hand, getting off camera and off mute so that we can engage with you, and not having a big conversation in the chat. We won't be answering questions in the chat. The other ways that you can provide input is the online survey or verbally at meetings today. And the online survey Bianca, you're going to go ahead and put in the chat the link to the online survey and other materials that people can find. So you'll see that in the chat. Bianca will put that in there. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Ivan to introduce his team. Ivan, go ahead.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's nice to see such a good turnout. I see we're up to 85 participants and still climbing, so that's really good. I'm Ivan Gall. I'm the interim deputy director for the Water Resources Department. With me today, I have Annette Liba, who's our Technical Services Division Administrator, and Justin Iverson, who manages our groundwater section. Justin's going to be giving the bulk of our presentation today. So he'll be covering a number of interesting topics, and I'll touch on those shortly. Let's see. I think, are we ready for the next slide, Jamie?
I think you got it.
So I wanted to just spend a couple minutes to kind of kick things off this afternoon. What we're trying to do is seek your feedback on ideas for modernizing the state's groundwater allocation criteria. That's going to help us protect senior water right holders and sustainably manage the resource. Justin's got some interesting examples for later this afternoon. So this slide here is to kind of ground us on what we are doing, just touched on that, and what we're not doing. This process is not going to affect exempt groundwater uses or exempt wells. That's a common question we have, and I'll touch on that on the next slide in a little more detail. This process is not going to affect regulation of existing water rights, and the process is not going to affect our water right transfers. So again, what it's really designed to do is look at allocation that's used for new groundwater right applications, and how does that review process unfold in the agency? How do we come up with a finding that water is available for the new proposed use? And we want to do that in a manner that protects our existing senior users out there, both surface water and groundwater, and maintains stability of water levels in our aquifer systems. Next slide, please. So I mentioned exempt uses. Again, this process that we're talking about today doesn't impact those, but some of you may wonder what those are. Under Oregon water law, there's a series of exempt groundwater uses that do not require a permit, so they wouldn't have to go through the allocation process. I've listed the 4 main ones here, and there's 3 others that are seldom used, but from a well or wells, you can have up to 15,000 gallons per day for single or group domestic. You can also have 5,000 gallons per day for an industrial or commercial use. There's stock water, which is exempt for 1 cow or 100 cows. And then irrigation of up to 1/2 acre of lawn and non-commercial garden. All of those are exempt uses from wells. And again, this process doesn't impact those in any way, shape, or form. Next slide, please. So I wanted to put together here kind of a quick timeline for us to figure out a little bit about where we've been with this process, where are we today, and where are we going. This work is a top priority for the Water Resources Commission. The work on this allocation project began about a year ago and involves several staff presentations to the Water Resources Commission. In the summer of 2022, this past summer, the commission asked the department to go out and gather additional public input, and that's really what this meeting is part of. So Justin's going to provide a presentation, but we're trying to reserve the bulk of time to certainly answer some questions, but also get feedback, thoughts, and ideas on the state's groundwater allocation process there. Looking forward in time, we'll begin drafting rules sometime this fall. We'll convene a rule advisory committee later this winter, and there will likely be several meetings with the rule advisory committee. And we have a pretty ambitious goal of working towards rule adoption in the spring of 2023. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Justin. He's going to, in his presentation, provide you with a quick introduction to groundwater hydrology and some of the key components of that play into allocation of the resource. He'll touch on our current framework for groundwater allocation and some of the issues we see associated with that. And he'll present some initial ideas or concepts to help modernize that groundwater allocation process for the department. So with that, I'll turn it over to Justin. Take it away.
Hey, and Justin, before you get started, let me just remind everybody about holding your questions until the end of Justin's presentation. You can use the chat to put your questions in, or you can wait till the Q&A section and raise your hand. And his presentation will go till about 2:45, and then we'll pause and take all your questions then. So thanks. Go ahead, Justin.
Okay, thanks, Jamie and Ivan. Again, I'm Justin Iverson. I manage the groundwater section here at the Water Resources Department. And I want to take a bit in order to put us all on a common ground, give a little bit of history, talk about some key groundwater concepts so we understand what we're talking about when we talk about is groundwater available for new appropriation, and then talk about some of the issues that our current allocation process has created in the background and some proposed solutions to those, so that folks have an idea of the types of feedback that we're going to be looking for during the public input part of the process. I want to acknowledge that I am condensing down information that we've shared over many, at least 6 significant presentations to the Water Resources Commission, going all the way back to October of 2016. When we had our in-person meetings, we had a handout for folks that looked similar to what you see on the right-hand side of the screen here. That is available on our website under a link called Timeline. Maybe Bianca can put that into the chat. But that document has a number of links to the staff reports as well as recorded presentations for a number of topics, again, that I'm going to kind of smash into this half hour. So we're going to necessarily for time be presenting a broad overview. We're going to be talking about generalized and simplified groundwater processes so that we can focus on our main points. And again, we're going to be kind of working toward trying to point out and then gather input from y'all on how we can update or modernize our groundwater allocation process so we can be most protective of existing senior users and allocate groundwater within the capacity of the groundwater resource going forward. So with that, I will go into part 1, key groundwater concepts. We are going to talk about generally what groundwater is, what we're talking about when we talk about groundwater. We're going to place groundwater within the hydrologic cycle, and then we're going to spend most of our time talking about the source of groundwater to wells. So first of all, what is groundwater? When we talk about groundwater, we're talking about water that exists in the pore spaces of unconsolidated materials under our ground, or under our feet, excuse me, the interstitial spaces between sand grains or clay particles, or we're talking about water that's in fractures in solid rock that might be located under our feet at the surface or deeper. So what we're not talking about is underground rivers or lakes, but a much more dispersed source of water that's present almost anywhere in Oregon that you may wish to drill a well. And that groundwater is just one component of the hydrologic cycle. It is recharged, we say, or water flows into the groundwater system through infiltration of rainfall or snowmelt, some other processes. It flows into the ground and into flow paths. and that water is indeed flowing someplace, generally flows quite a bit slower than a surface water feature would flow, but it's flowing nonetheless, and it goes someplace. Very commonly in Oregon, it goes to discharge to streams or springs, and I'm going to be talking a lot about that in the next few slides. That groundwater, again, receives recharge, it flows, and then it discharges. So we're going to kind of zoom in on a specific case here, or a very basic case, I should say. And I should note that all these block diagrams, these come from US Geological Survey circulars. This particular figure and set of figures comes from a document called Groundwater and Surface Water, a Single Resource. So, the title kind of says it all. And the point of this circular is to point out that, again, water infiltrates through what we call a recharge area. It joins the groundwater system below the water table, and it flows to someplace. And in this very simple block diagram, that someplace is a stream. So gonna take that concept and introduce it a different way. This is a picture of Eagle Creek. It is located in a wilderness area on the west flank of Mount Hood National Forest. And this is a place that I like to go in August or September when it's really hot in town, and I want to get up to some place where it's cool and there's nice cool water. And I can always count on Eagle Creek to be flowing, even though it might not have rained appreciably in the last 2 or 3 months, even though there's no snowfield above this stream, even though there's no dam above this stream. And the reason that this stream is flowing is from a concept we call base flow. So base flow is that discharge of groundwater that I was just showing on that diagram. That water has likely recharged throughout the watershed in the uplands over the past year or several years. It's flowed through the ground, and it is discharging, coming out to the surface in order to maintain the stream flow over time. And I'd invite folks watching here to, think about any small streams that you might know of and how they flow year round, and to consider that, you're familiar with that, and that is indeed groundwater that's discharging to the surface. And then think about that a little bit further and think about how these surface water bodies that are flowing as base flow during the late summer months from groundwater discharge have been relied upon by the earliest of water users in Oregon, be that the first, European settlers, or going back much further to the indigenous tribes that were here, right? The most senior users, the users that have been using this for the longest period of time are our oldest users. And in a prior appropriation system, we call that our senior users. So again, our most senior users are relying upon essentially groundwater flow. So what happens, more modern times? We don't just only take water from streams. We've been taking water from wells for quite a while. And so what might that look like, again, from our conceptual block diagram here? So in this case, we've installed a well in the groundwater system. This Q stands for flow. There's flow out of the well. And you might recall that this water table used to be, relatively flat, dipping toward where it intersects with the stream. And as we start taking water out of the well, we start, in this conception at least, to be draining pore space, and we draw that water table down toward the well. So the fact that the water table is drawn down at the well is the process by which we induce flow toward the well. Groundwater works on a gradient system where the potential of groundwater drives flow from higher potential to lower potential. That potential is made up of a combination of elevation and pressure in the groundwater system at any point. And that flow is analogous to, from for example, the flow of heat from high heat to low heat, high temp to low temp, the flow of electricity from high voltage to low voltage. Groundwater works in a very similar manner with flow from high potential to low potential. So again, when this well is turned on, we drain some of the pore space around the well. We draw down the water table. That creates a potential for flow that drives flow in this groundwater system to the well. Okay. And over a short period of time, or early time, I should say, when a pump is turned on, we're really kind of taking some of that storage away, if you will, draining that pore space. But over time, then we start to draw in water from further and further, and this cone of depression grows and grows. So if you keep your eye on this point here that's marked as a divide, at later time, shown in this next slide, that water table now is, or the water level in the well is dropped lower. That cone of depression is larger and it's spread out to intersect this stream. And at this point, assuming that the geologic material is such that water can flow from that stream to the well, and or there's a large enough capture area up gradient to meet this flow rate Q, then at later pumping time, once this cone of depression is established, it's not going to grow that much more. So we've drained some pore space, the stuff that I've hatchered here in this diagram, but as more and more pumping occurs, we are capturing flow that would otherwise discharge to a stream, or maybe we're pulling water directly from that stream. Okay, so again, at early time, we are draining pore space, creating the cone of depression, drawing on storage, which lowers water tables. At late time, we are drawing from water that would otherwise flow to streams. Okay, and the water level regime is going to stay essentially the same. So I'm going to show that as a plot to kind of reinforce that idea. This one comes from a USGS circular called Streamflow Depletion by Wells, Understanding and Managing the Effects of Groundwater Pumping on Streamflow. And in this plot, on the x-axis, we have pumping time growing to the right. And on the y-axis, we have percentage of groundwater pumping rates. So that means the amount or the percent of the flow of water coming out of a well from early time to late time as a percentage of this line, water from storage, starts at 100% and drops down. So again, early pumping time, almost 100% of the water that's flowing out of that well is coming from dynamic storage in the aquifer. But very rapidly, this other line picks up, and this is water from stream flow depletion. Starts at 0, but as we capture water that's headed toward the stream, and then perhaps eventually capturing water from the stream itself, that's going to grow and grow until at late time we're approaching 100%. Okay, so again, early time, water from storage is dominant. Late time, water from stream flow depletion is dominant. And I'm going to couch the later part of my talk in terms of these two sources of water to wells. Okay, before we do that, I just want to put up another way of knowing here for those that appreciate statements from folks that are really bright in the field. This is a quote from Charles Tice. He was one of the first people to kind of build a quantitative understanding of groundwater. And in a paper that he wrote in 1940 called The Source of Water Derived from Wells, he said, from the standpoint of groundwater conservation and statutory or other regulation, the following point should be emphasized. All water discharged by wells is balanced by a loss of water somewhere. Okay, so for the last 82 years, it's been known and published that groundwater isn't its own standalone resource that we can just tap into without affecting the overall hydrologic cycle. Okay. So with that, I hope with that background, it should be relatively intuitive at this point to understand that groundwater allocation over the past 65 years, that's since the Groundwater Act in 1955, has contributed to, in various parts of the state, reduced surface water base flow and or groundwater level declines, and that those impacts come at the expense of existing users. Okay, and I'm going to come back to these figures. This is a figure on the left of our groundwater resource concern ratings. I'd refer you back to that original kind of timeline background document, the June 2021 commission meeting staff report and presentation have a lot of background on this figure. This is a figure that commonly gets put up. It's a plot of available stream flow for surface water allocation in the month of August for new stream flow uses, and any sub-basin or water availability basin here that's in tan means that that surface water body or basin is fully allocated in August. Okay, so that's the period of time where base flow makes up the greatest degree of stream flow. So with that, I'm going to move into the second part of the talk here, talk about some of the issues that our current allocation system, our existing allocation system has led to, and identify a few potential solutions. I want to clarify that these aren't the only issues, just two major ones that that struck me as important to communicate. And the initial ideas for updating the allocation process aren't the only ideas there. Again, just from my perspective and that of folks at the department that have helped start to think through this process. These are some initial ideas we have, again, in this case, as a example to kind of give folks an idea of the types of feedback we're looking for in our public comment period. So I said two items, and I said earlier that I was going to basically get at these in the context of the source of water to wells. So the first few that I am going to talk about are the fact that our current set of rules will assess for and avoid short-term and acute impacts to surface water while allowing or not fully assessing the cumulative impacts that have likely developed or impacts that develop over long-term development. Okay. Second part that I'm going to be talking about is that in our current existing allocation process, we have required that data must exist to indicate over appropriation before we identified any loss of storage as leading to over appropriation. So in areas, this figure up on the screen is a screenshot from an actual water right review down in the South Willamette Valley in areas where our nearest water level data is 3-ish miles away. We may or may not feel that we had data available to address groundwater conditions in this particular area. And I'll get into a little bit more about that in the next few slides. And I also want to cross-reference our, again, going back to that timeline background sheet, the August 2017 staff report and presentation to certified water right examiners that went along with that, laid out our current existing allocation process in a lot of detail. So you can find more detail there. Again, I'm going to gloss over a lot of stuff here in the next few minutes. Okay, and so like the overall punchline here for our existing allocation process is this, that over the past 10-ish years, and that's as of June of 2021, more than 70% of applications for new groundwater rights resulted in a permit. And in areas that we've classified as concerning or significantly concerning, we've actually issued 80% of applications. So that comes from, a relatively transparent process, right? That folks that help people apply for water right consultants understand the process, and they understand, where their clients are likely to receive water and where they're not. And so as a result, most of the applications we receive are designed to receive a new permit as close as possible. So I said two concepts. I've kind of split the first one into two. So there's going to be three here, but I'm lumping one and two. First concept and issue I'm going to talk about is going back to this source of water to wells at long pumping times being from stream flow depletion. And while our Division 400 policy definitions define overappropriation to include that results, overappropriation of groundwater occurs when there is further depletion of already overappropriated surface waters, we have layered on top of that set of rules that we call Division 9 or OAR 690-009, and then policy over the top of that. And we, again, when we assess the impacts of groundwater development on hydraulically connected streams, we generally look at acute impacts or this kind of long definition of the potential for substantial interference. And we look generally at impacts of wells within a mile to a stream and wells that their impacts after 1 year or less. Okay, and so again, I'll ask you to remember back to this plot of, early time, we lower water levels and take water out of storage. Late time, we capture water from these flow lines. And if this well, there's no scale on here, but if this well happened to be more than a mile from this stream, even though at late time in this, simple construction, most of the water is coming from stream depletion, we wouldn't take that into account because of our spatial limitations. And similarly, we would only look at the pumping impacts after a year and not after a long period of time. So to give an example of how that might look, this is a plot from a numerical model of a groundwater simulation built for the Deschutes Basin. And it's an estimate of the source of water to a well from surface water depletion over time. So this is just showing 1/2 of that two-line graph I showed earlier. On the x-axis here, we have months, and it's kind of hard to think in 50-year chunks of months, but this is a roughly 30-year period here. So just think about this as 30 years. And on the y-axis is stream depletion percentage from 0% up to 100%. And once the well is turned on here at month 49, the amount of water from stream depletion is initially relatively small. And after 1 year, the amount of water to this well from stream depletion is about 3%, and the other 97% is coming from storage. But as the well continues to pump, this amount of water from stream depletion builds over time until, in this case at least, after about 30 years, 85-90% of the water that's flowing into that well is coming from stream flow depletion. So that's, coming from water that would otherwise have flowed to the, in this case, the Crooked, the Deschutes, and Waichus Creek. So again, right now, our current construction for looking at impacts to surface water doesn't take this long-term impact into account. And also this is, one well's impact. The next well has a similar stream depletion, curve, the neighboring well has a similar one, and those all build on top of each other to cumulatively act on surface water bodies. And again, I'll bring up this same plot here of August available stream flow calculated at the 80% exceedance level, and just make the general point that for a large part of the state, shown in tan here, surface water in August is fully allocated. And so those impacts, the impacts of any new groundwater right that's hydraulically connected to surface water, that's any well or point of appropriation installed in a groundwater system that is naturally discharging to surface water, is going to further affect that surface water body. And if we issue a right today that has a 2022 priority date, over time, that's going to be impacting that surface water body that is already fully appropriated. So I've labeled this concept one, surface water availability, and one way in which we can look at the full cumulative and long-term impacts of all water rights that we evaluate and potentially issue into the future is to look at, hey, is this proposed groundwater use likely along a flow path that's going to feed a surface water body? And if so, is our surface water availability system say there's any more water available in that hydraulically connected surface water body? And if not, then we should take that into account, and perhaps in our future construction, we would propose to deny that groundwater right, because that's a very junior use that is going to impact stream flow over time. Now, in addition to the surface water availability, the model that we've got that we use, we have both areas where we don't have any data available or built out in the water availability reporting system. We also have, especially in some of these kind of larger water availability basins, we have a lot of knowledge of specific streams from our water master core. And so as kind of part two of this concept, perhaps an idea is to take a look at the surface water regulation history, the on the ground measurements and regulation from our water master core, and to identify streams where we commonly regulate back. This figure is big and aggregate, and basically just says that there's at least one stream in each of these administrative basins that's regulated back to a priority date of, for the Oahe 1865, right? So if we're already regulating back a stream to an 1865 priority date, should we be issuing a 2022 priority date groundwater right in that basin that's hydraulically connected to that stream, right? Because there's a lot of people since 1865 that are getting curtailed off every year. Okay, so with that, I'm going to move to the last concept. This concept gets at, again, impacts to groundwater levels, where we are seeing the source of water to wells coming dominantly out of storage. This, happens to all wells at early time, but in some wells that are not well hydraulically connected to streams, then maybe we aren't capturing much through flow, in which case we are pumping storage. And as we draw down the storage in that aquifer, we are going to observe that through water level declines year on year. Our statute language says that the legislative policy is that reasonably stable water levels be determined and maintained. However, we currently don't have a definition of reasonably stable that is set on a statewide basis. We have that identified for two critical areas in the Umatilla Basin, the Butter Creek and Stage Gulch, both in rule have reasonably stable defined, but otherwise the general definition we have is what's excessively declined. The opposite of reasonably stable is defined. And that has led to some ambiguity over the years. And so I'm going to show you some example hydrographs to try and make clear what that ambiguity is with going with a definition of excessively declined. So excessively declined is in our Division 8 rules, OAR 690-008, and it has several parts, but one of those parts is that's kind of easiest to understand and calculate is a decline in water level of 50 feet from the highest known or measured water level. And so as kind of case in point one, this is a hydrograph of several wells that are located north of the Mount Angel Groundwater Limited area. For scale, this is a section square here, and so this is 4 miles across. Several wells in this area, only one of them actually in the Mount Angel Groundwater Limited area, but these water levels show water levels back in the 90s of about 100 feet above mean sea level, and being measured over time to near present day, water levels are closer to 50 feet. So at least for a few of these wells, that kind of clearest of definitions of excessively declined has been met. And so I think it's safe to say that in this case, at least, we are not at reasonably stable water levels. And indeed, new applications for the salt aquifers, which is where these water levels come from, or these wells are completed, we have not been issuing water levels there for some time because of this water level trend. So that's relatively straightforward. As another example, though, I'm going to, skip over to the other side of the Cascades and look again at an example from the Deschutes Basin. Nothing special about these two basins, just where I had readily available hydrographs to be put in this presentation for kind of real world data showing what we're talking about. In this case, I'm going to show hydrographs from wells that start to the west here around Black Butte Ranch near the Cascade Crest, where the dominant recharge comes into the Deschutes Basin system. And we've got wells that are going further and further eastward for the most part. And on this hydrograph, I'm going to use the Sisters Fault Zone is going to be used as kind of a demarcation for wells that are west of the fault zone, in the fault zone, and then further and further east past Redmond here out to Powell Butte, kind of in the far eastern side. So this hydrograph is a little different than the last one I showed because the area is so large and the elevation difference so large. I've basically normalized everything to 0 occurred in 1995, whatever that water level was. And then this hydrograph shows water level change for spring water levels since 1995. So for these hydrographs here that occur for wells west of the Sisters Fault Zone, we see that water levels rose by 20 plus feet from the mid 90s to 2000, fell again back to near 1995 levels by 2005, rose again, and are still remain relatively high, right? So we interpret this water level fluctuation to be due to climatic cycles that happen on a roughly decadal timescale, and water levels rise and they fall with various precipitation years. And even though they might have fallen 20 feet here, on the whole, from my perspective, opinion, I would call this reasonably stable, right? So perhaps no problem there, but the ambiguity builds the further to the east we go. So here's an example of a well within the Sisters Fault Zone. It was following a trend with its neighbors here for the first 15 years or so. And then while these went up, this one didn't, or maybe it went up just a little tiny bit. So it's fallen off trend. And a question arises, is that reasonably stable? And, how would a reviewer, a technical reviewer of a new application in this vicinity interpret that, right? With our current rule set, it's a little difficult. Let's step a little further east of the Citrus Fault Zone. We have perhaps what could be called relatively stable water levels here through this first decade. And then water levels have been declining at about 1/2 foot a year. And the question arises, is that reasonably stable? We haven't tripped any of the definitions of excessively declined. So, hard to say what's the outcome of a new application in this vicinity. And then we'll go even further to the east. And here we've had water levels that since 1995 have pretty much generally always been on the decline, and in recent years are declining 1 foot a year. So again, we haven't tripped any definition of excessively declined, but I think that perhaps here we're getting, closer to a easier call on, hey, that doesn't appear reasonably stable, right? We've lost 30 feet in the past 25 years and no indication that that's going to turn around. So for a new application in this vicinity, do we want to hasten our approach to this 50-foot definition of excessively declined, or do we want to say, hey, that's not reasonably stable? And of course, it would be much easier if we could have that definition readily available in some way that we could apply that, uniformly across the state to all new applications. So with that, I'm gonna kind of stop this background section and we'll transition into the public input stage. And again, I want to encourage people to think about and provide their feedback either verbally today or through the comment field on how can we evaluate applications in the future for new groundwater rights to be more protective of existing senior users, as well as to ensure sustainable use of our groundwater systems into the future. So thank you very much.
Great. Thank you for that, Justin. So here we are at 2:45, and we're going to be taking your questions and your ideas here until a little before 4. And Bianca's going to put in the chat the link to the survey, online survey. And so you can also submit your input through the online survey. So the chat will be there. If you want to go to the next slide, Justin, just a couple of reminders about keeping yourself on mute. Use the raise hand function, which is at the bottom of your screen to get in the queue, or you can press *9 if you're calling. If you're on the phone, lower your hand and mute once you're done speaking. So we'll call on you. You can unmute yourself. You can put yourself on camera, ask your question, and then go off screen and unmute. You can use your webcam if you're comfortable. You don't have to, for sure. You can use the chat to request technical assistance or to put a question in. And we actually are going to start off our Q&A time with a two-part question that came in the chat and another question that came in the chat. So that'll kind of get us going. You want to go to the next slide, Justin? So we'd like to spend the first amount of time just really with any clarifying questions that you have based on the presentation that Justin just gave. Certainly we'll take questions all the way till just before 4, but we really are hoping to gather your input and ideas on the 2 second bullets you see on the screen here. Justin in his presentation put out some concepts for you to consider. There was information about, what is the criteria that we should be using regarding protecting senior water right holders. There's some questions around the appropriate time scale to sustainably manage groundwater resources. And there are other ideas that you probably have to share with all of us. So we're hoping to move into ideas as quickly as we can. And so with that, I'm going to go ahead and start the questions with a 2-part question that came in from Trish Carroll. And Trish asks, first part is, what is Water Resources approach to addressing groundwater dependent ecosystems such as springs, lakes, meadows, etc., which are important refuge for biodiversity across the landscape? And what are your thoughts on how to incorporate climate change variability? So two-part question from Trish.
Well, maybe I'll get started and Ivan can jump in. So right now, from my understanding, a groundwater dependent ecosystem would need to have a water right associated with it for us to take that into account. So whether that be stream-based flow in the case of an in-stream flow right, or a spring that might have a water right associated with it, we would assess for injury to other rights in that way. And with respect to climate change, we are thinking about that, but it is not formally in our review process. So again, in that example I gave of water levels in the Deschutes Basin, where we have this identified impact from recharge variability with decadal climate cycles, we think about that when we are evaluating our available groundwater data to determine what's the state of the resource and is water available for further appropriation.
Justin, I'd add to that, for springs that are large enough and are tributary to streams, those are factored into our surface water availability numbers that the groundwater section does currently look at through the Division 9 process there. And yeah, from climate change, we certainly recognize that we're probably going to be facing additional scarcity in the state. We've already seen growing seasons increasing in length, and the evapotranspiration demand is going up both from just the natural landscape and also from irrigated agriculture. So.
Thanks for those questions, Trish. There was also a question in the chat from Aaron Lamb. And Aaron, I'm not sure if your question got answered in Justin's presentation. Your question was, where is excessively declined defined? And I know I heard Justin say that we're looking to apply that evenly across the landscapes. But Justin, what's your answer to that one?
Sure, it's defined in Oregon Administrative Rule 690-008. And then it's alphabetical, so you'll find excessively declined as well as declining excessively. So there's two spots there that you'll be able to find that in. I don't know that I can put that in the chat and screen share at the same time, so maybe somebody else can help me out. We do have links to those Oregon administrative rules on our website.
Can you say it one more time and Bianca can write that down and put it in the chat?
Sure, it's OAR 690-008.
Okay, great, thanks for that. Stan, I see your hand is up. If you can let us know who you are, introduce yourself and an agency or organization you're with, and ask your question.
Okay, my name is Stan Dean, and I'm with Oregon Association of Conservation Districts. In the presentation, I was kind of expecting that we would get some of your ideas about moving forward. So this seems awfully open-ended right now. And I'm seeing that you can kind of go modify the existing rules, things like play with how many miles from a stream do you evaluate it? How many years do you look out in terms of impacts, in terms of interference with stream flow, and the definitions of reasonably stable? And I would say those are just basically modifying the existing process that you use. Do you have any ideas that would deviate or go in a completely different direction of how to do things? Or are you thinking that we're just going to be playing with the existing variables?
Well, we certainly thank you for that. I appreciate that. We certainly have to work within the existing statute, right? So water, basis measure and use of groundwater is, use within the capacity of existing resources, and reasonably stable water levels shall be determined and maintained. Those are all statutory policies from the legislature. And so any rule revisions we make are necessarily going to, be within those constraints. Now you hit upon how far out are we looking, right? So that has been a matter of rule and policy. And again, we've been looking at preventing short-term impacts, but the way in which we're evaluating today does not take those long-term impacts to stream flow into account. And certainly those exist and build, right? We know that from kind of hydrogeologic based principles. And so right now, we don't have any, any starting point drafted, right? We didn't want to anchor the conversation any particular thing. And so I would flip that back for you in this group and say, how long is appropriate in your mind, to look ahead? Are we looking ahead a year or 10 years or 100 years? What's our planning? What in your mind do you feel like our planning horizon should be? And that's the input we're looking for before we start drafting something. So again, so we don't anchor unnecessarily to one thing or another.
Thanks for the question, Stan. Misty, go ahead and unmute yourself and introduce yourself. Let us know if you're with an organization or an agency or how you use water.
Hi, my name is Misty Buckley, and we are a homeowner in Oregon. I think something that I am curious if you could answer. So you talked about 80% in the beginning of the meeting, 80% of a fixed number. What is your confidence that that supply is the same? Are you taking measurements every year and adjusting that 80%, or is it a fixed number from sometime in the past? And if it is, then what is the confidence that it's the same number? And also, it seems like that measurement wouldn't take into account the increased exempted uses. So your residential wells and an increasing population. Can you talk a little bit about that, please?
Sure. So I think the 80% number, if I'm interpreting right, was the percentage of flow coming out of a well that is sourced from groundwater that would otherwise have flown to surface water. Unless the surface water source is very small and the flow is very large, like when you say, have you measured that, the measuring the impacts of any single well are going to be very difficult. So that number is a calculated value based on our understanding of geologic properties and distances and rates. And so to the best of our ability of setting up equations to describe how things work in the physical sense, that's where that value comes from. We can measure aggregate impacts of decreasing base flow over time, right? And of course, there's many sources that play into that in the water budget equation. So I'm not going to get too far into that other than to say that's a value for a single well that is modeled based on physical properties and equations of how groundwater moves, similar to how one would calculate the power draw of a light bulb or something like that. So do we take exempt uses into account? So the exempt uses are generally relatively small. So we could calculate it just like any other pumping well, right? The percentage of that well flow that would come from stream flow depletion at a long pumping time, we would calculate that in the exact same way, but it's a percentage of a much smaller number. So the USGS puts out estimates of groundwater use nationwide, but broken down by state and county, that those come out about every 5 years. And the most recent one was for 2015. and the estimates of groundwater use in Oregon for exempt uses was, I'm gonna ballpark this, roughly like 3 to 5%, not relatively large. So in Oregon, again, groundwater use for irrigation uses is by far the dominant type of use. And so when we, yeah, I'll just stop there. So we take it into account, but it's relatively small in the grand scheme of groundwater use in the state.
Can I follow up a little bit? Is that allowed?
Yeah, I could do a brief follow-up. I mean, we've got
So-
Jeremy on deck.
Sure, I'll make it quick. So perhaps I misunderstood what you were talking about, the 80%. I think my question is more asking if the state, you know, and granted, it doesn't exactly follow state lines. We have basins and whatnot, but if there's a finite supply in the state and you're trying to allocate a percentage of that supply, how do you know that you're allocating the correct amount? Does that question make more sense?
I think so, but I'll let my answer, I'll let you decide that. So, okay, I'm interpreting your question from a water budget perspective, right? So of all the rainfall in the state that infiltrates and makes it to the groundwater system, how do we know kind of what that is, and are we managing within it? And I often will try to express that, you know, we saw that hydrologic cycle, but it's not necessarily all water comes into Oregon and all water goes out at one spot, right? So as you say, we have basins and we have small water cycles on a basin scale and then a sub watershed scale and so on and so forth. So really the water budget impacts are relatively local, and that's why we look at water levels, because that water level shows us what is the balance of that through flow, right? Recharge in, discharge out, and you know, all else being equal, water level should be about the same, and the gradient that is set up to drive that groundwater from the recharge to the discharge area should be about the same. But if water levels are falling year after year, that's an indication of some imbalance in that water budget, and that might come from pumping out, that could come from drought, that could come from a number of things. But looking at that water level trend over time is the best way that we have to assess the water budget for that localized area. And that's what we focus on, and that's what the reasonably stable definition is pointing toward.
Thanks, Misty. Jeremy, go ahead and unmute yourself and introduce yourself. Let us know who you're with or how you use water.
Hey, good afternoon. Jeremy Morris, Klamath County Public Works Director. I'm wondering, are there any proposed rule changes coming down the pipeline for, say, groundwater recharge or even surface water reuse? I'm just thinking out loud here. You know, inside of a drought cycle, let's say we have a banner year and we have 200% snowpack and the reservoirs are full. If we had the right infrastructure in place, we could change those declining groundwater charts to possibly being more neutral or even increasing. So just wondering legislatively and from a department level if there's any possible changes coming down the pipeline.
I can take that one, Justin. Jeremy, good question. Thank you. Right now, we do have statutes and rules that deal with artificial recharge for aquifer systems and then aquifer storage and recovery. So both of those are existing mechanisms that are being used here in the state to take, in essence, surplus surface water at some point during the winter months typically, and either recharge it through artificial recharge into say a sand and gravel aquifer, or treat it and inject it into deeper basalt aquifers or volcanic aquifers through aquifer storage and recovery. There are no plans currently to change or update those rules or statutes of which I'm aware. We do recognize internally that those rules are a bit dated and they do need to be looked at and freshened up probably. And the state has a lot more experience with aquifer storage and recovery. So we are talking internally about taking a look at those at some point in time. But this groundwater allocation project, again, is very important to our Water Resources Commission and really has kind of risen to the top of the pile with a couple of other rule processes that we need to get done as soon as we can.
Thanks for that, Jeremy. Jordan Smith, go ahead and unmute yourself and introduce yourself. Let us know who you are.
Hi, I'm Jordan Smith. I'm one of the new water right reviewers with ODF&W. So I just was wondering if you guys, well, first of all, that was a great presentation. I really appreciate how you took the complexity of that data and kind of simplified it. I thought you did a good job. So I was just wondering if you had any data showing improvement in those critical groundwater management areas, like where you have more stringent rules, and about how long that takes, because I could see that maybe influencing decisions moving forward if there was a big lag time or if we had any control, basically.
Yeah, okay, thanks, Jordan. I will answer that, but I want to start out by saying that these rules are looking only at forward new allocation, not at critical groundwater areas, or looking backward at existing users. But to get at your question, yes, there are some areas where we've seen improvement. The Cooper Mountain, Bull Mountain critical area in the Tualatin Basin is one of those where between curtailment of municipal uses and really those municipalities going out and finding a surface water source instead of groundwater source in that area, as well as then in later years, municipal aquifer storage and recovery, as Ivan just touched on in the last question. We've seen those water levels come back to historic and sometimes above historic levels. There are other parts of the state, other critical groundwater areas where that's not the case, and we've curtailed use, and we've seen that the rate of decline has gotten less, but often still declining. So we've seen a mixed bag, and really it depends on, are there alternate sources available, and is there surface water available for recharge projects? So.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Thanks for that, Jordan. So we've got 102 participants, and so do feel free to put your hand up so that we know you have a question, or looking at the two bullets on the screen here about criteria and time scale. Water Resources Department really interested to hear your thoughts on those two items as well. So don't be shy. Thank you, Sean. Appreciate that. If you want to go ahead and unmute yourself, introduce yourself, and if you're with an agency or organization, let us know who that is.
Hi, I'm Sean Piggott. I'm the president of the Deschutes Red Bands chapter of Trout Unlimited. So obviously I'm concerned about stream flow and the implications from groundwater. I guess a clarification question. You mentioned 80% of water right applications are approved in areas of concern. Did I get that right?
Yes, that's right. For the past 10 years as of June of 21.
So I'm not familiar with how much water is involved with that 80% approval rating, but is that sustainable into the future?
Well,
I know it's a tough question.
Yeah, no, that's the crux of it. So those applications were approved under our existing set of rules and criteria, right? Our existing statute, rule, policy, how that all wraps up into a technical review is a process that is standardized. And again, you can go back to that August 2017 information to see all the details of those decision points. But according to how those rules interact with the statute of, you know, the basis measure and extent of water use is beneficial use without waste within the capacity, something to that, you know, effect. those are the rules we have to address that statutory requirement. And what we're doing in this process is saying, hey, you know, we've been doing this for 65 plus years, and let's take a look at where we stand today, and are we being as protective as we should be? And our commission has said, hey, we would like you to take a look at this and be more protective, be, you know, make sure that we are sustainable. And so I think that the changes we're proposing to make are meant to address that.
Hey, Justin, we had a question in the chat from Kaylin to go back to the 80% slide, to put that up and take another look at it. Can you go back
Sure.
and find
Yeah.
that one?
Yep.
And then Sean, while Justin's getting that question up, or that slide up there, did Justin answer your question?
Yeah, he did, but I guess the real crux of the matter is, how can we help Justin and the department define what these rules should be, so there's a more of a critical review of these water right applications into the future?
Right. So again, I'm tried to organize my thoughts around the source of water to wells, right? That water comes from dominantly depletion of storage that's been in the aquifer, and we call that dynamic storage because it's changing on some time scale. And then at later time for hydraulically connected aquifers where there's this throughput and discharge, you know, what is the impact on groundwater that would have otherwise flowed to base flow? So again, some of the main questions are, you know, right now we constrain ourselves to acute short-term impacts. And, you know, I don't want to put words into your mouth, but extrapolating, you know, it sounds like maybe you're on the side of the spectrum of we should, you know, really take a look at the full range of impacts over the long term, right? And plan out further.
Exactly.
And, you know, similarly with groundwater level declines for storage impacts, you know, how much is too much? What is excessively declined? Or excuse me, what is reasonably stable water levels? That's the criteria term in statute. So those are two of the real, what I consider, you know, big ones. But you know, there's a number of things that we assess in that evaluation of a new groundwater right. We assess injury to other users, we assess capacity of the resource, so on and so forth. So there's room to take comment on any of those aspects, but really we want to put this out there for folks to provide input, again, like I say, before we draft up an initial set of rules and convene a formal rules advisory committee. And, you know, going back to Stan's comment, since I see him on the screen with his hand up, he said, hey, I wish you would have given us some ideas, and those will come in the future as we convene that RAC, and we've got a draft set of rules that we're working with, and there will be further comment period at that point in time. So this is the first step, the first gathering of information.
Thanks,
Great.
Justin. Thanks, Sean.
Thank you.
Justin, you could probably go back to that slide with the couple of questions in it. Hey, Cole, I see your hand up. If you want to go ahead and unmute yourself, be on camera if you like, and let us know who you're with.
Hi, my name is Cole Hendrickson. I'm with DEQ Eastern Region. Justin, great presentation. Thank you. This is a question I've had for a while, and I thought this was a good time to ask it. I was wondering if groundwater rights that do have potential for substantial interference are included in the water availability and reporting system data.
So short answer is yes. Yes, they are. If a new application is identified as meeting the criteria for potential for substantial interference, then it gets added to the water availability reporting system calculations. However, if not, then not, right? So we're not adding impacts from new applications that are approved, which would mean either PSI and there's water available, right? And we debit a bit against the available water, or there's no PSI. If there's no PSI, then there's no debit in the water availability reporting system.
Great. So it's kind of the consumptive use in that table.
Correct.
Thank you, Justin.
Thanks, Cole. Hey, Sean, I see your hand is still up. I think you might have just left it up, but if you had a follow-up question, let me know. And then Stan, I see that you're got your hand up. Go ahead, Stan.
Yeah, I decided to ask a second question because I didn't see too many hands up
I
here.
know. I support that.
Is there opportunity to throw another lever into the equation, or maybe it is already? With surface water rights, in dry years, we regulate back and cut off the junior water rights holders. Is that a variable that we can incorporate into the process here to help manage things in the future?
So I'm going to do the same thing I did with a previous question and say I'll answer that, and this particular rulemaking isn't going to look at existing rights or regulation of existing rights. However, the tool we have to do that is the critical groundwater area designation. So that's the existing tool we have. I guess I'll just note for completeness, we've got another concurrent rulemaking going on what we call or what is Division 10. So OAR 690-010. So that would be the place to talk about that.
I was thinking, when I asked the question, I was thinking in the back of my mind that you have existing water rights holders that maybe are not in critical groundwater areas, and I could see that being challenging to try to do something in that arena. But if you only looked at water rights issued going forward and tried to implement more of a policy to regulate off as the hydrologic cycle changes over time. And is that a possibility of just carving out from here on out in time and trying to be a little more inclusive of regulating off as the times change?
Stan, I'll take a stab at that one. From some of the prior meetings, at a couple of them, folks have given suggestions. One suggestion has been to evaluate the opportunity to issue permits that are limited in time. And we have a little bit of experience with that in the Willamette Valley here. We've issued some permits with 5-year lifespans on them, if you will, to establish crops like filberts or hazelnuts there, or vineyards. One of the challenges with issuing a permit that is, what's the word I'm looking for here, that we could regulate off, it's regulatable, is the lack of certainty for the water right holder down the road. And so we do a tremendous amount of regulation with surface water rights around the state today. Justin included that map of how far back priority dates are on an average year for many of the basins around the state. And that's a function of water scarcity on all of those streams. And, the prior appropriation system that the state of Oregon has. I think really what we're trying to get at with this process is and I think what our commission would like us to do, is to make sure that when we get an application for a new groundwater right in, we have some level of data and certainty, if you will, or confidence that if we are to issue that permit, we would be able to do so and the resource can sustain that new use without injury to other senior users out there, be it surface water or groundwater, and also where we're not going to put the aquifer system in a state of water level declines. And so if we do a good job of modernizing this groundwater allocation process, in theory, looking forward, the new groundwater rights that would be issued would be in locations where the resource is there, the capacity of the aquifer system is there, and there shouldn't be any impacts to other senior users that are out there. So I hope that helps.
Thanks, Ivan. Thanks, Dan. Cole, I see your hand up again. Go ahead and ask your question. Remind us who you're with.
Thanks, Jamie. Yeah, Cole Hendrickson, Department of Environmental Quality, Water Section. I, like probably most of the folks on this call, was pretty surprised about that 80% number as well, of groundwater applications and areas of concern. Are those maps provided, or is that data provided to OWRD's caseworkers and utilized in the consideration of new rights?
Well, so Cole, the map, the groundwater concerns map is publicly available to everybody. That's again, I'll reference that June 2021 commission meeting and the staff report for all the details there. That outcome again is, I think, more a reflection on, okay, so we have concerns about some stream, and I'll just say those concerns are aggregated into townships, which is 36 square miles, and that report gives a lot of caveats on multiple stacked aquifer systems and different sides of a township and what that means. So in some cases, it might be totally appropriate that, you know, our concerns of groundwater level declines and that Mount Angel example that I gave were at the southern part of the township, I believe, and maybe by the time you get 6 miles away at the northern part of the township, water is available for additional appropriation. However, it might also be just the fact that, you know, our process is transparent, right? Like we have this Division 9 process where PSI has these criteria, and people understand that, and they will apply with the intent to get a water right and do whatever's in their power to, you know, say, well, I know what the rules are, and if I'm on this side of the line, it's a no, and this side of the line, it's a yes, and they'll do everything to get on the proper side of the line. So part of that is just the definitions that we have for what impacts surface water, and you know, those definitions give certainty, and they were written in the 90s and were, you know, I've got to assume appropriate for their time and place. But now in 2022, as we issued under that regime or not, it's a point in time where we're taking a look at those rules and that criteria.
Thanks, Cole. Thanks, Justin. Karen, I see your hand up. Could you want to go ahead and introduce yourself? Let us know who you're with or how you use water.
Sure. Karen and Bob
Yes,
Rasmussen. And my husband has a question.
We're have a domestic well. We're in southern Jackson County, and had the question: when domestic wells receive approval for emergency agricultural use, is there or should there be monitoring of impact during the permit period and guidelines for allowable water level drop during the permit period?
Okay, so I'll answer that and also give the caveat that, well, I don't know, drought permits, I guess, could presumably go in here. For the most part, as far as I am aware, when we issue emergency drought permits, they have come with permit conditions that require water use as well as water level measurement and reporting. So I guess the short answer to your question is yes. And as far as an allowable drop, generally our permit, what we call permit decline conditions, or you know, when we talk about reasonably stable water levels, we talk about those water levels year on year. We're talking about water levels we measure typically in March, but in spring, after as much recharge as happened as possible over the winter to the system and before large scale irrigation use, that's the point in time at which we collect or require collection and reporting of water level data and compare it. So because a drought permit is typically just for a season, we only get one measurement. So it's difficult to do much with that other than putting it into the system and looking at it over a long period of time.
So maybe take into consideration it for a future year if there was an impact. And just in general, I don't know a lot about this. Just a last question. We talk about appropriations and so forth. As part of what you're looking at, include water such a valuable resource. Is the enforcement piece there to encourage compliance of all types, whether it be to apply for a permit for emergency use? How's the stick and the carrot equation now, or do you see a need to look at that as you go forward with these changes or proposed looking at changing the framework of permitting perhaps?
Yeah, I'll answer that one. The water masters around the state are the ones that are responsible for ensuring that water users are in compliance with Oregon water law. That includes exempt users. It's not uncommon that we find, particularly down in your area there in Southern Oregon in the last few years, use of exempt wells or domestic wells for commercial cannabis operations or illegal cannabis operations. And so we're working closely with Jackson-Josephine County law enforcement, state police, and code compliance in both those counties to get after that. This process that we're kind of highlighting today really doesn't have an enforcement component built into it. Again, what we're trying to do is evaluate a new application for a proposed groundwater use and make sure that the groundwater resource is available in that particular location to sustain that use without injury to other senior users out there, or without negative impacts to the aquifer system. Once that permit would be issued, then the enforcement side of life, or the monitoring of conditions associated with the water right, begins. And that, again, is typically done by the water master staff out there.
Okay, well, thank you. And thank you for this meeting.
Thank you.
Thanks for those questions, Karen and Bob. Jordan, I see your hand up, but before we hear from you, Jordan, if you don't mind, there's a question in the chat from Mark. Mark Landauer asks, that says that he's concerned about communities that need a redundant backup water source. Many municipal providers should have a backup source, and I'm worried that those communities that do need this could be denied a new permit, despite the fact that they would only use the backup source in extreme cases. Any thoughts on that, Ivan or Justin?
It's an excellent concern, Mark. If you, and I think really you should cut and paste that into one of the comment forms so we make sure we capture that. We can look at
sorry, Ivan, that's probably too technologically advanced for me, so that's my input.
Well, I'll take care of it for you then. But it is a good thing, and it's, I think if you think there are, I'm going to use special interests out there, should municipalities be afforded more flexibility under a future allocation process? Are there other uses that should be afforded more flexibility out there? Those are comments that are good to have. Whether they would get worked into this particular rule or not, I don't know. Perhaps a more appropriate place to put a hierarchy of uses like that would be in the basin program rules themselves for a specific basin, where the commission could be asked to look at particular uses and classify, say, the remaining groundwater resources in a particular basin for municipal use, or exempt uses only. And that's an example of what we did down in Harney County. So.
Thanks for that, Mark. Jordan, go ahead. Remind us who you're with.
All right, yeah, Jordan with ODFW again. I'm thinking back to the figure where you were talking about, when you're looking at a groundwater application, it's within a mile and within a year impacting surface water. I'm just wondering what your thoughts are on just treating every groundwater use like it impacts surface water, because it might, 10, 15 years down the line, or if there's any cases where that wouldn't be appropriate if you look that far long term.
So that would fit under an evaluation of what we call hydraulic connection. So we look at is the groundwater source that's being proposed for a new use, do we think that that's a groundwater flow path that is currently occurring over some reasonable time period is kind of a tough thing to say, but I'll just flip it around to where that's not appropriate. So for example, on the Columbia Plateau, in Columbia River basalts, we've seen that drilling deep wells into those basalts, they've become kind of separated from a real robust, I'll say, groundwater flow system by faults and folds. And so when those groundwater sources are being pumped, again, we're typically pumping storage, and we're seeing that in groundwater level declines of 100+ feet. So so in that case, I think we would likely not find hydraulic connection. So we know we have some information statewide about the geology of the state and nearby well logs and inferences. So that is already an assessment, that assessment of hydraulic connection. And what I presented earlier was basically saying, okay, once we find hydraulic connection, do we then limit the scope of our evaluation to wells within a mile of a stream, impacts within a year, or should we be looking broader than that, right? And with cumulative impacts and with long-term impacts, that's certainly that was one of the concepts, right? Was to look at the longer-term cumulative impacts.
Yeah, I think that would be a good idea for sure.
Thanks, Jordan. Misty had a follow-up comment that says, Mark has a good point. Similarly, individual dry residential wells are potentially challenged to resolve their issue by drilling a community well, because a community well is a righted use, whereas individual residential wells are not. But it seems like it would be the same quantity of water either way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a really good point. So we'll add that to the comment group.
List, yeah, comment group. So here we are at about 3:35. So we have until 4 or just before 4 when we're going to make some next steps comments. So if other people have questions or ideas, I know that the Water Resources Department is particularly interested in your ideas for how to move forward around criteria and time scale. So other folks want to get in the queue with other comments, questions, or ideas. You can just raise your hand and get on in there. And while people are thinking about it, Ivan and Justin, maybe what we can do is share a little bit about, we've had a number of these meetings already. I see Kaylin in the queue. We've been down in, we've been out in Bend, we've been in Salem, in LeGrand, down in Medford. We've had good participation at all these meetings. Lots of good input on representation on the RAC, some good ideas about, just some interesting ideas about criteria and time scale that have come up. And we can share more of those ideas with you to help get your minds thinking. But let's hear from Kaylin. Kaylin, you want to introduce yourself and let us know who you're with?
Of course. Thank you for the opportunity, Jamie. My name is Kaylin Barter. I'm the Oregon Water Program Manager with the Wild Salmon Center. And Justin, I want to, again, thank you for the really wonderful presentation. As Jordan said, boiled down some really technical information into digestible chunks. So thanks for that. I'm curious whether in its evaluation of different possible paths forward, if the department is looking at how other states or regions have tackled these same types of questions, and if so, if there's any takeaways that are ripe for sharing at this point.
So we certainly, I guess I'll say, I think that we always like to look to our neighbors and see where they've been successful in their work and get general ideas. That said, because we have to stay within our statutes and our particular set of legislative history, it sometimes I think can make it difficult to pick and choose certain things, but I don't have an example right now for this, but I know that folks have been looking elsewhere, and we'll aggregate that as best we can.
Thanks, Justin.
Hi, Mark. Go ahead and introduce yourself. Let us know who you're with.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yep, coming through good.
Mark Rogers, I'm the chair of the Oregon Council of Trout Unlimited. And our council supports the Water Resources Department taking a more conservative and precautionary approach to issuing groundwater permits. As a fisheries conservation organization, we are concerned about the risks of groundwater overallocation and its effects on surface water availability. And also just water users looking for alternatives if they can't use groundwater. And overusing surface water, which of course affects fish and wildlife as well as human beings. We encourage WRD to consider all available information about surface and groundwater availability moving forward, and such as maps of the area where surface water users already don't receive their full entitlement. The council supports considering climate change in making groundwater permit decisions and using a long time horizon of 50 years or more in making those decisions. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. Appreciate those comments so succinctly, and hopefully you'll, we are recording this meeting. We are doing meeting summary for every meeting. All of the materials will be available on the website. But if you do want to put more detail in the online survey, that would be really helpful. And as I said, this is our 6th meeting, and we heard at previous meetings, people had concerns and questions and ideas around data collection and the need for data, more real-time data, and how do we get that. Folks talked about, like I said, representation on the advisory committee and questioned a statewide approach versus potentially a basin or a more localized approach, and how local knowledge would be considered as a part of the process moving forward. So those are some of the things we heard. Ivan, Justin, other things that we heard that you want to share to kind of whet people's appetite for their ideas?
I think you touched on it, Jamie. You know, there's a lot of interest on more data collection. Justin got a number of questions on drilling dedicated observation wells in key areas. How does data collection work from those? You know, how much data do you need? So I think, you know, people recognize that good data can be really helpful in making these decisions.
And I would add, we've heard some things similar to what we've heard about today. So folks interested in time-limited permits with examples like, what if I wanted to establish a crop that wouldn't need water forever, but needs it while it's a seedling, like a hazelnut tree or a grapevine? What about those types of uses in the future? And also comments about enhanced recharge, which we heard from one of our commenters, and how can, you know, the state think about continuing to support and perhaps supporting more development of artificial recharge and aquifer storage and recovery projects.
Yeah, and we've heard, like similar to Mark, other people who are supportive of a more conservative approach, and others who are really concerned about a more conservative approach and what that means to current senior water rights and current uses. We also heard a lot of concern about climate change and how that would be factored in, just the changing climate and ongoing drought conditions, and what does that mean? There were some questions and comments around how springs would be treated, how they're treated now. So we've heard I just want to give you a flavor for some of the things that we've heard. We've had an average, I think each of the meetings had 60, 80 people in it, except the Grand was a little bit smaller. So we're very well attended meetings. Looks like there was one question in the chat here from JM. It says, good presentation. The data suggests that some aquifers do not appear to be impacted by water users as others. For example, west of the Sisters Fault versus Mount Angel area. It seems as though the intent of this meeting is to develop a one-size-fits-all rule, but shouldn't rules be geographical based on data?
John, this is Ivan. That's a good observation. And if you think geographic specific or basin specific rules would be a better size or a better fit for a particular basin, then that's the kind of comment and feedback we're looking for through this process here.
Yeah, and I'm sorry that I failed to say that. We've certainly heard that at a couple of our other meetings too, and I didn't jot that down to mention, but certainly folks are concerned about a one-size-fits-all approach, and that's a real tension. I mean, we're trying to create a set of rules that can be applied, fairly across the state, and we understand that local conditions matter. So we're doing our best to keep both those in mind.
Thanks, Justin. Hey, Misty, I see your hand up again.
Yes, I know one of you guys had commented earlier that you use USGS data, and it just occurred to me, there was a monitoring well near where we live, and I know that on the USGS website, it said that they were ceasing monitoring of that location due to funding restrictions. So I guess my comment would be to, as the previous person said, more data rather than less. Let's make sure that USGS isn't backing off of that if that's the data that we're relying on.
Thanks, Misty. That's a good comment. We do work cooperatively with the USGS in a number of basins across the state. Klamath Basin's a good example. Funders, I should say, the source of funding down there to help support the USGS in their endeavors has kind of come and gone over the years. We've had a little bit better success working closely with the Bureau of Reclamation down there. But we do try and work cooperatively with the USGS, and in the event they drop some wells because they don't have the resources, we'll try and pick them up and keep the data going as best we can.
Thanks for that, Ivan. Thanks, Justin. Well, why don't we do a last call here for any other questions or comments? We certainly don't need to stay till 4 if people feel like they've had a chance to put out what they wanted to get out there. And Bianca has put in the chat at several points the link to the online survey, so you have time to complete that. We're looking for getting responses back by October 19th, which is a week from this Wednesday. Oh, here's a comment from Molly. Molly has a question. Agriculture seems to be bearing the brunt of climate change, yet also a culprit of some groundwater depletion. You can't have plants without water, and with a hotter Oregon and more populated state, how do you plan to balance this?
So yeah, that's a good point. That jogs my memory as to another thing that we've heard in other meetings is how do we do more with what we have? Certainly, there are many instances in which the efficiency of irrigation systems could be improved to get the most crop for the drop, if you will. And I think that also, I don't know, I'll get much more broad and say that the department also has a an arm that looks to feasibility study grants for conservation, reuse, and storage projects, and for grants to build out projects that would conserve water. So we're operating on that parallel track as well to try and support folks in modernizing their systems and looking at the feasibility of kind of novel ideas to save water.
Thanks for that, Justin. Justin, you want to go ahead and go to the next slide?
Sure.
Ivan, you want to talk about next steps?
Sure, thanks, Jamie. Yeah, so as Jamie summarized, this is our last public meeting. We've held 4 others prior to this in different places around the state. You can continue to submit public comments and input through October 19th. The link is there on the slide. As Jamie mentioned also, all of these meetings have been recorded. We're in the process of getting those uploaded to the website. It's probably going to take, I don't know, Justin, if you've got an estimate, a week or more of time to get them done. Justin's presentation will be posted on the website, so that'll be accessible as well. We will take in all of the public input we've received, comments, suggestions, thoughts, and Kearns and West is going to assist us in putting together a report on that, and we'll end up posting that on the website for your consumption also. At some point in the near future, we'll probably begin drafting some or modifying some existing rules to try and get at some of these concepts. And then we'll go into the RAC formation process. And as I said, we're cautiously optimistic that we can move this process forward for rule adoption by our commission sometime in the spring of 2023 next year. So I think with that, I'll thank you all for your attendance. It was really a great turnout today. It was exciting to see everybody here. Good questions and comments and suggestions. We still have a few more minutes if anybody wants to, ask any additional questions there. But if not, thanks again, and appreciate your time.
Yeah, thanks for that, Ivan. And everybody who's attended all the meetings is getting a follow-up email with the links to materials that we have available so far, and a complete summary of all of the meetings will be available in a report within 2 weeks of this meeting. So unless there is anything else for the good of the order, well, again, thank you all for coming. Appreciate this, and watch your email for a thank you message and the links to how you can get the presentation materials and when the report will be available. So thank you, everybody.